And what's b? So at some slope, it's going to have the responsiveness, how the cost is going to affect the number of trips. How responsive the number of trips is going to be the cost. It's going to be affected by the slope. So here they have a sample of this estimation result. So here's our y, and here's our a, and here's our b, and here's our x. It's negative because it's demand curve sloping down. So what we can do is plug in values for x and get predicted values for y. That's what this mathematical function will let us do. Okay, so we could make a table. And right now, we'll say the cost is 0. But let's propose that we're going to charge people to get to this park. We could propose an admission of $10 or of $20 or of $30. If we're just supposing that they're going to the park is based on how much we're going to charge them. And then we would have this predicted number of trips that we would get. So this is the actual here for 0. And then we would get these predicted values of how many trips people would take based on different costs as we plug in an increase in costs. And this here is going to generate a demand curve. So we're going to simulate charging a price. We're going to simulate increasing x, see what happens to y, and we can get a demand curve out of that by increasing the x. So we can go back into our spreadsheet. We can take the travel cost that we have and add on $10 at a time and see how, this is our predicted y. We have that equation, and we'll see how y goes down as price goes up and y goes down. And this would just be for the increasing the $10. And then there's another table of increasing to $20, $30, $40, and $50. And then here we're seeing the predicted go down from 900, 400, 120, 0. So now we have a demand curve. Here we have price, which is cost per trip. And here we have quantity of trips. So now we're back to day 1, demand curve 1. We have a demand curve that we've gotten out of our spreadsheet. It's declining with price. And then when we want to do welfare analysis, what's this area here? What do we call the area under the demand curve? Consumer surplus. Here they can call it total benefits. But we can do analysis on that area. We can look at different, what shifts would do, what different slopes would do, how that would affect our measurement of the total benefits of this asset. We can average it out. We can say per visitor, we have a $14 value per visit. We could do a total area. We have a whole bunch of different things when we have a demand curve for how we can come up with economic value. So an example, this was a big one in environmental history, was stopping a big dam at Hell's Canyon. Hell's Canyon is, as I said, on the border between Oregon and Idaho. So they came up with a value. It's what's called a run-of-the-river dam. So just if there's water running through, it generates electricity. And they came up with a value of electricity of $80,000 to build a dam there. And the way they do that is they say comparing this site for making electricity compared to a second best site. So what's the opportunity cost approach? How much is this site incrementally better than the next best site? And then doing a travel cost study of the recreation of using this wilderness. The environmental economists were able to come up with this huge number of $900,000 for this canyon in its wild and pristine state. And the environmental economist's point was, even if this is 10 times too high, even if we're off by a factor of 10, we're still much higher than the value of electricity, of the value of the river once it's been dammed. It was a proposal to build another one of those ones where it's like a really high concrete dam that floods hundreds and hundreds of acres. They actually built a few smaller dams that you can see in the picture that don't flood a huge giant area. But this is the west here. Hell's Canyon is here. So there are 3 small dams that got built. But this is the Columbia River Basin. And there's a lot of dams. A lot of dams. So hundreds of thousands. So historically, millions of salmon entered here and swam way up into British Columbia, way up into Idaho. Less salmon every year. There's a different endangered runs. Now they do populations of salmon based on which areas they come from. So a lot of the salmon are endangered. I think up by Hell's Canyon, there were hundreds of thousands of salmon still at that point that made it through the dams. But building the dams there reduced their populations of fish as well. So we have a lot of dams, a lot of cheap electricity in the Northwest, but significant reduction in terms of what the natural fisheries would be. So we can also think about how our regression. So we started with a regression that was just one term, 1x that we're observing, whether how much your cost was. So what are some things that we would do in a model to add new layers of complexity? Anybody want to think of some x's that we could add on to? We're out there. We're sending our undergrads or our grad students to stand around in the parking lot with a clipboard and talk to people. What would be more information that we could get? And we could get a better model of what the value of this river or this wilderness is. Say it's a river. What do people do in rivers? What's that? Rafting. Did you go on a rafting trip? What do people do on a rafting trip? They spend money on the rafting, right? So you have expenditures on rafting. What else do people do on rivers? Fishing. This is a big one. How many fish did you catch? Or how was the fishing? How was the value? So fishing is one of those ones that's interesting to do because the quality of the asset is going to relate to the quality of the fisher. Like if it's a good river that's got a healthy fishery, you're going to have more recreational value. Another way to think about this is, so it was your weekend, you tried to decide where to go, you decided to go to this pristine river and go fishing or rafting. There's also what else could you have done? Where else could we have gone? So there's alternatives. How many trips do you take to the other site? You could pick, if it's beach quality, you could be like, there's a set of beaches you could go to. If it's fishing spots, there's a set of fishing spots you could go to. Yeah? Yeah, sort of like frequency, how into the spot you are. But you can also ask a bunch of characteristics about the individual, just to make the statistical fit of the model better. What your education level, your income level, your environmental concern. Standard one is, do you give money to any environmental groups? Or do you belong to a fishing club? Something that you would get at which type of people are using the resource. Do you belong to the Sierra Club? And then, so the way regression works is the more accurately picked things, we can get better and better at predicting the number of people that are using the resource. So another example, this is the example in the textbook. It's really interesting to read through it. This is New Bedford, Massachusetts. This is Cape Cod right here. This is the Cape Cod Canal. I don't know if you guys have ever been to Massachusetts. These are super fun sites here. They see this one's like Mercury's, PCB, Mercury's, DDT, Mercury. So these are super fun sites in Massachusetts. And here's a picture of New Bedford Harbor with some old industry there. There's a river coming down here, the Acushnet River, and there were some factories up here that were making electronics. There was a chemical, PCBs, that were used to wash off and clean off electronics, and they went down the river, they went down the city sewers, and they filled up the mud of this bay, the highest concentrations that have ever been measured in the environment in PCBs. And so there's a whole bunch of mud at the bottom of this harbor. And if you look, I mean, this is a developed area. New Bedford, Massachusetts is a city. So right in this city, there's some pretty terrible pollution. It limits their recreational opportunities of going to the beach and using their harbor. It also drastically limits the fishing in the area. Anybody got the fame of New Bedford? What's New Bedford famous for? A bunch of Californians. Whaling. It was the capital of the whaling industry like 100 years ago. Gladly we don't do that anymore. But there's inshore fisheries. There's lobster. There's all sorts of ground fish. So the EPA has to monitor what fish can be caught, prohibit fish from being caught from this general area. And skipping forward to the present, there are barges out in this harbor today dredging these muds out and taking them somewhere and processing them and trying to get the PCBs out of these muds. When this study is done in the textbook is like 20 years ago, before this big Superfund project is going on, when they're looking to get money from these companies to say this is the damage to the natural resources, these are the lost recreational opportunities. The people of New Bedford can't go to the beach in their own city, so this is the millions of dollars that you're going to need to help us pay for the cleanup so that we can clean up the beaches there. So they had went out with students with clipboards, talked to different people, and this was a beach here, and they could figure out for the different people in the beach what their travel cost was. And then they made it slightly more complicated, more robust, we would say, by saying the travel cost to the first and second other alternative beaches. So their model's going to be a little better, and their demand curve's going to be a little more accurate because they have 3 possible beaches that people are making a choice between. Fort Point's going to be the closest beach. There's 2 other beaches that are a little further away, and they're going to choose which beach to go to and get a value for the Fort Point beach. I think that the Fort Point beach is like either this one here or this one here, which you could picture is sort of in New Bedford, and now they have to drive out of New Bedford to go to an unpolluted beach. So we're just trying to approximate the value to the people of New Bedford of their beach not being polluted by PCBs so that we can sue this big company who has polluted their harbor. Then they do a regression. So this is this beta that's coming out of regression, and this is the slopes for the other beaches. So the easier it is to get to the other beach, the more that will go to the other beach, and the more it costs to get to this beach, the less will go to this beach. Standard regression. So just wrapping this up, we talked about what are some of the more X's we could put in. Don't need to write all this down, but we can just think of there's a whole bunch of different ways we can make these models more robust. There's a whole bunch of different things we could do to make it more accurate, our measurement of whether people are going to go to this beach or not. So the cost of the trip, the distance to the trip, other places they could trip, substitute sites, other reasons they're going to go anyways, how great their experience was, did they like it? I'll put the slide on the internet so you can get it, but perceptions of environmental quality, we've talked through most of these already. Okay, so we can move on to hedonic pricing, off travel cost. So hedonic pricing is, again, going to be sort of based on this regression idea where we're going to gather a bunch of information, but this time we're going to do it, we can think about we're not going out to gather information from asking people how to get there. We're going to get information from databases. We're going to say we can get information on, for example, housing values, how much houses cost or sell for, and then we can gather other attributes about the housing. Where is a house located? What's that neighborhood like? How does the neighborhood or location or what street it's on affect the value of a house? We can use GIS, which is using this computer database of space, a spatial database, to do distances. So we can do house prices and distances to some amenity, distance to the beach, distance to the river, distance to something that we're trying to measure, distance to the site of pollution. The farther away the house is from the polluting factory, the better the price is. The closer to the factory, the more the price goes down. So it could be amenity, it could be externalities. And then again, we can do a function with this regression analysis. So when we talk about housing, there's going to be a whole bunch of attributes of the house itself. How big the house is going to have more to drive the value of the house than how much it's affected by pollution. Neighborhood characteristics, accessibility. So we need to do a good job at getting these variables that are going to explain the bulk drivers of the housing price so that we think that our environmental outcomes are like a residual, a leftover that after we've measured well what's actually driving the value of the house. So here we think about if the value of the houses are Y, we have a whole bunch of X's that are mostly going to drive Y, and then we have a leftover that we can try and measure what's going to be the environmental attribute. Here's just an example from Long Island. So this is area, Long Island was formerly mostly a rural farming area where people were growing vegetables for New York City and farming, but over time it's become more and more desirable as a place to live. It used to be for a place to weekend, but now people commute all the time. So we look in here, we have little parcels of people's houses, and then we have amenities. We have like a forest or a field, a train track. And then we have these people, they're on the big busy road, the arterial, the highway we call it on the East Coast. And here we have people that are living on sleepy little cul-de-sac. So we would have different attributes of different houses affected by our environmental resources. And so a group might be saying like, well, let's preserve open space. Let's work on the green belt for the city. Let's preserve some open fields. And how's that going to drive up house prices? Will it be valuable to our town to preserve open space in the middle of our town? So they did a regression that the Y here was the value of property per acre. So this is their Y. And then they had a whole bunch of X's in their regression. And the one that they were looking for was open space. So increase in open space will increase the value of their land. If you live near a farm, farms might be noisy, it might be dusty. Interestingly, this will have an equal effect lowering the price of your land. If you're on the big busy road, if you're on the noisy highway, this is going to lower the value of your land. This is zoning. So think about how dense houses are. These houses up here, they're packed in there. This is not a 2-acre zoning. If you think about these houses, there's a whole bunch of land around them. They have multiple acres around each house. So the 2-acre zoning, the spread out land, people want to have a whole bunch of property. If you're in an area where the houses are all spread out, you're going to have a higher value of the property. And finally, there's wetlands, a very small effect. So for the group that's looking to pay, let's get people together, let's get the town to buy this open space, they could say, this 10-acre open space that we want to buy in our town that's surrounded by 15 parcels of land, this is the amount that it's going to increase the value of people's lands. So they could come up with a number. $400,000 is the amount that, if the town buys the open space, it's going to increase the value of people's properties. So this is the one in the book about Chesapeake Bay. So what's the value of cleaning up pollution in Chesapeake Bay in terms of affecting all of the properties of people that live around Chesapeake Bay, increasing the home values? Chesapeake Bay in Maryland, it's very polluted. It was once a very, very productive fishery. People are working on increasing the water quality. This is old, but this is, there's a group, an environmental group that works on saving Chesapeake Bay that puts out a report card. There's report cards like this around here that come out for beaches. There's the beach report card for California that gives beaches A through F. So this is Chesapeake Bay, different parts of the river. There's some parts that have really bad water quality. There's two big things about here. There's domestic, so there's sewage coming off, and there's also agriculture. So there's a whole bunch of pollution coming from chicken farms, confined chicken farms, where there's a whole bunch of agricultural waste that goes into these rivers and pollutes it. So people's houses are all throughout this area, and how do people's home values go along with how polluted the river is? So this is a big statistics table in the paper, in the book. These are some leading environmental economists here at the University of Maryland. So they had a huge database of how much homes were worth, and they had a whole bunch of different variables, how far you were from the city. So the closer you are to the city, the more your home is worth. But importantly, they have a whole bunch of things, but down here they get to a variable on the pollution in Chesapeake Bay. So if you clean up pollution by 100, you would increase the value of the home. So if you were able to reduce pollution, you could increase the value of the home. So these are a whole bunch of other X's that are making their model more robust. And finally, as a residual, they'll have pollution, the externality of that pollution, how polluted the bay is near their home, will affect the value of their home. So finally, the last one is this issue of cost to avoid pollution, what we call averting behavior, cost that we spend to reduce our risk. So two ways to think about it are costs that we want to reduce risk, or expenditures that we could avoid so that damage doesn't occur, or expenditures that we would have if damage did occur. So these are difficult because we get human behavior on what humans perceive of risk, and what human perception of risk and what actual risk is oftentimes are quite out of line with each other. And it's hard to measure the amount that risk is reduced, and how much, when people are spending on something, how much are they spending on risk reduction? So ecosystem services, this is a really big one. This is ongoing. This is still a hot topic. So people that put aside land for wetlands can reduce the amount of flooding. So if there's a flood, you'll see this in the Mississippi River, in the Midwest, the Ohio River. These rivers have been channelized into concrete channels going along the front of the city. There'll be a big levee. But every once in a while, there'll be a huge flood, and you'll see, on TV, you'll see pictures of cities in Ohio underwater, or cities along the Mississippi underwater because of a big flood. So if this town had not, put up the seawall and sort of left a buffer of wetlands, they would not have flooded. So they have a cost, like how much cost they're going to deal with a flood, and we can sort of imply from this cost of the flooding how much the wetlands could have saved them, could have protected them from this cost of flooding. So, and then they'll also have costs. They need to respond to a flood. They need to spend a whole bunch of money putting out there in sandbags and pumping people out, fixing up. So they'll have a whole bunch of other costs they put in here. Let's make the seawall bigger. Let's make the seawall on our beach bigger. Let's make the levee that goes through town higher so that the river won't top the levee this year. And those are very expensive projects. And finally, for wetlands, we definitely have insurance markets. We definitely have the insurance companies going out and saying what they will insure, what they won't insure. A lot of people might be familiar with this from the rebuilding of New Orleans after the hurricane. Where they put the line on the map was where people got to rebuild their homes. And so they had the people that understood the hydrology and the geology of floods putting lines on maps where houses could or could not be built. If the insurance company won't insure your house, then you can't get a mortgage. Without a mortgage, you can't rebuild. So somebody deciding, where's the right area that's just enough high water that it won't flood for once every 100 years gets their home built or not. So we have insurance companies backing this with billions of dollars. And then we also have a lot of what we call averting behavior about water quality. People spending money on drinking water. This happens all around the world. It happens in the poorest countries in Africa. There are some studies that show that some of the poorest people in the world spend the most amount of per capita or per year on water, on getting clean water. There's a study in the book about trichloroethane. There's some toxicology people in here? Nobody? Sometimes there's people from toxicology. I was hoping they could help me with the big molecular things that I don't always know the names for. So you can measure how much households are spending on clean water. There's a counter proposal in the textbook about a study in Korea where households became accustomed to buying drinking water, and then the city had actually cleaned up the water quality of what they were actually provided. But people had learned to perceive that the water out of the tap was unsafe. But as people cleaned up, as the city had cleaned up the water, people still were paying. So what this example from Korea is about is that people have a perceived risk of something that's different than the actual risk of something. And we have this thing here.